We're going to continue this week and next week on our series called Raise Up. And series we'll be looking at our focal passage that's what was part of our church vision 7 years ago, Isaiah 58 and verses 11 and 12 in particular. So let me just read them to you just to give you that some context. And this passage says, "The Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in the sun-scorched land and will strengthen your frame. You will be like the well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Your people will build up the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations. You'll be called the repairer of broken walls, the restorer of streets with dwellings." We're going to particularly focus on the second part of that passage. And reminding ourselves that this is conditional on doing right. This is for Israel. It was conditional on them doing right and seeking justice and being the people God called them to be. And so a few weeks ago, we started the series. We looked at raise up, build posture. And posture. This is just thinking about having the right heart, the right attitude, the right being people of humility, about having the right view of people around us. It's to see the hurting, the broken, the downtrodden as Jesus sees them. You know, we cannot demonize people and love them at the same time. We can't slander and denigrate people and then pray for them and expect God to hear our prayers. And so that was what we were reflecting on last time. If you haven't picked that up, got a recording of that. Pick that up and then you'll be with us on this series. And so today we're thinking about building prayer, and then next week building practically, and then building presence. And I think I've probably told you a little bit about my love for programs like Grand Designs, and those programs have sort of followed it, this idea of having cameras as you did up a property, as you renovate it. Who would have thought you could make entertainment out of DIY and literally watching paint dry? I guess they build up the tension, don't they? And all of a sudden there's a commercial break, and then before you know it, like lemons, we're sort of hooked in, aren't we? And I don't quite know why it is, but in the course of my love for Grand Designs, and these programs started quite a few years ago, I was flicking. It's a male thing to flick, I believe, and the batteries have run out on the remote control this morning, and that is probably down to me. Thanks, mate. Oh, it's cute. No. Oh. You won't get many batteries for £1, will you? Anyway, this episode that I watched, I flicked onto, and you might have seen this. It was this waterworks. It was quite an inspirational job. This couple found this old waterworks and in Chesterfield in Derbyshire, and they wanted to turn it into their home, and that was their living room in the bottom picture there. And it was a huge project, clearly, a labour of love, as they say. And they would go there and spend many painful and freezing cold nights, chipping off old plaster, replacing windows, grouting walls, scraping the floors of this old building so they could put in the new. And it was quite incredible. They had a little mini that sat in their front room. Absolutely amazing, outstanding. But it's right. If you take out the old and you put in the new, you're prepared to put in the new. And perhaps you know what I mean. Perhaps there's plenty of things in life that require hard graft, the hard graft of preparation. You may have had to prepare a home, done some renovations, some DIY, so that you could make it your own home. Maybe you've done the hard work of preparation around study or revision so that you could be prepared for exams. Perhaps you've spent time in preparation for a wedding, or actually probably you've hopefully spent more time in grafting, preparing for the marriage. Perhaps you're prepared for a meal, prepared for holiday. The hard graft of preparing for a sermon, like I have done. We'll come back to that all in a minute. If there's one character in the Bible, apart from Jesus, who I find probably the most inspiring, it's Nehemiah. And some of you might know the story of Nehemiah, but I keep putting this on my list of sort of preaching series, and so, but it just keeps getting bumped down, and so we'll probably come back to that maybe next year. But as soon as you get into the book, there's this powerful and fundamental lesson that we all need to take note of, and you don't need to turn to it because it's just a few verses. That's the one. Yeah, Nehemiah 1, verse 2 to 4. And so Nehemiah, his brother, has just come from Jerusalem and gives this report. And he says, I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived. So Nehemiah, in exile in Babylon. And so he questioned them about the Jewish remnant that had survived the exile and also about Jerusalem. They said to me, those who survived the exile are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down and the gates have been burned with fire. When I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. After receiving the news about the physical state, the walls broken down, the gates burned, and of the people, they were in trouble and disgrace. He formed a committee. He called the deacons together and he phoned around some of his mates. They sent a newsletter out. He drew up some plans. He organized a sponsored swim. No, he didn't do any of that. What did he do? He prayed. He sat down and wept. He mourned and he fasted and prayed to the God of heaven. I don't get the impression it was just one of those throw-up emergency prayers that we do too often. Should we read that it was for some days? I wonder if he lost count because it was some days. Just a reflection really on our previous series, the Free Runner series. I wonder if this was something of our response when we are faced with our giants, when our giants come on the scene, onto the battlefield. How differently would that fight turn out? I wonder if there's a correlation with how big our giants are to the amount of time that we spend in prayer. If we're not that great at getting down to pray about our own situations, our own giants, then really there's no hope of us getting down to pray about the giants in other people's lives, about the situation, the ruins of our own communities, of our world around us. In the first of our series, of this Raise Up series, I wanted to stress the importance of the gates were burned with fire and the people were in distress and disgrace. I wonder if you heard that account of the city of Jerusalem that was brought to Nehemiah, whether it reminded you of any situations, anything around the world that you see, perhaps even the situations you're experiencing or the people that you know. What's going on in our own world? Now, we don't have gates in our country like we used to. I looked it up, and there's lots of places that have got, obviously, town walls or city walls, but I didn't find anywhere that had gates, and certainly gates that weren't closed at night to keep people out. You can imagine, couldn't you? That's what happened in ancient days, and in those days, gates were a sign of protection, of power, of safety. You had no gates, you had no protection. You were a city in shame because you've been conquered, you've been beaten, you've been defeated. I believe our cities, our towns, our communities are without gates and walls spiritually. When the heart of a country trusts in God, there's protection. Ancient Israel found this out. But when the hearts of the people are turned away, they're under attack and the walls and the gates come down. If we as the people of God are not tuned into this, what's going on spiritually in our country, we miss the reality that the enemy is dislodging walls and burning down gates. And he's sweeping through our cities and towns and communities with a destructive power that only Jesus can hold back. You know, in ancient times, I've no doubt you've seen this, perhaps you've seen it in films, where there'd be a lookout on the walls of the castle or the city, looking out to see the enemy approaching. It's sort of a well-used idea in the Old Testament and the prophets. The prophets would often use this as a metaphor for how Israel had failed to watch out, that the enemy had already broken in and broken through spiritually. Jeremiah 6:17 says this, I appointed watchmen over you and said, listen to the sound of the trumpet, but you said, we will not listen. You know, people are turned away from God. You know, prayer alerts us to the danger. It causes us to be watch people. And that is what we need to be. That's what we need to be doing. Prayer is a place we need to be as we seek to rebuild and restore. Oswald Chambers, you might not have heard of him, but he said, prayer does not fit us or prepare us for the greater work. Prayer is the greater work. We think of prayer as a preparation work or the calm after having done the work, whereas prayer is the essential work. John Wesley says, God does nothing but by prayer and everything with it. You know, Nehemiah knew this. That's why his first port of call was on his knees and bringing the city and the people before the living God. You know, prayer was a catalyst to raise up the ancient ruins. We know the story goes on, that God used Nehemiah in a mighty way. Just like we do the hard work of preparation and renovating a house, taking exams, having a meal, being prepared for a wedding day, for a marriage, we must do the harder work, the greater work, the essential work of prayer. And as we seek to raise up and to rebuild the broken places in our communities, the broken places and the broken people, we must pray, because God does nothing but by prayer and everything with it. You know, I'm grateful for the prayer warriors we've got in this church. We had a great time of prayer together on Tuesday. Those who we gather together, we pray. Those who pray for the work at church at home as well. I know there's prayers said at home, not just at the prayer meeting. People who pray for me, pray for our family, pray for those who lead our church, pray for those who lead ministry and mission here. Those who break their hearts in prayer for their community. It's a special role. But we all must get down to the hard, the essential, the greater work of prayer all the more, mustn't we? I don't know if we see the part that we've got to play in prayer. I accept that prayer is not always easy. Prayer is difficult. Prayer is hard work. Prayer is something we have to make time for. Prayer is coming to God in humility and saying, I cannot do, but you can. We must learn to do battle better. We must learn to target our prayers. We must learn to be persistent. We must learn to hear what the Lord is saying. Me and Terry have spoken about this before. We want to have some sort of 24/7, whether it's 24/7 or 24/1. Where do we start? Coming together as a church, just to say, church, prayer is essential as we take this challenge of speaking into our community, of loving and caring our community. We can't do it unless we're down on our knees in prayer. 2 Chronicles 7:14, sure we know it well. It says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, I will forgive their sins, and I will heal their land. Isaiah 58 verse 9 says, it was a passage we looked at last time, then you will call and the Lord will answer. You will cry for help and he will say, here I am. You know, these are the conditional promises of God to his people. He looks for us to do so he will act. Prayer is the work before anything commences. If we don't see that, as Charles Spurgeon says, that prayer is a boiler room of the church, then we're lost. We have no hope of dealing with our own giants or destroying the marauding enemy over our communities and neighbourhoods. Our issues locally, you probably know what some of them are. I spent a bit of time looking at what some of those issues are, and I was hoping to be spending some time with some people who have a little wander around our communities and talk to residents about what's going on. But this is what some of the things I've found. Housing and dealing with homelessness are key service challenges for the council. We have a markedly high level of households in the Wyre Forest in temporary accommodation, higher than comparable councils. We've got an ageing population. Obviously, I'm not looking at an ageing population here, but we've got an ageing population in the Wyre Forest. In fact, we have got an ageing population. I forgot to mention this morning, didn't I? We've got a birthday this morning. I'm sorry, Chris. Just it strikes me that Chris is ageing. And before Adrian says, I think he was aging on Friday as well. So I think Lillian as well, who's not with us this morning, she has celebrated this week as well. Do you celebrate when you're older, getting older? Yeah, anyway, you do. Sorry, I'm terrible with it when it comes to age. But we've got an aging population in the Wyre Forest, a higher percentage and a proportion of older residents. This places increased pressure on health and social care and specialist accommodation. There's high obesity levels, there's housing affordability problems, there's fuel poverty, there's notable health variations between affluent wards and the most deprived wards. I don't know, you probably know this, you see it at least, there's parts in our community, wards in our communities that are in deep poverty, deep issues, and actually sometimes those little pockets of deprivation, severe deprivation, are actually also surrounded by pockets of real affluence. And so sometimes in these figures, in the statistics that come out, they're not recognized as having this real deprivation because of the affluence around. And so very often they're neglected. Sorry, that's just one of my little bugbears. But there's a need for employment opportunities, suitable housing, manufacturing's declined in our communities. The ratio of economically dependent people, those people who are dependent, the ratio to those economically dependent to the economically active people is high. There's a higher proportion of people in great need. Educational attainment is low. Town centre regeneration is needed. Low air quality and water quality, very poor public transport and high levels of traffic congestion with poor strategic transport infrastructure. All a bit of a mouthful, all a little bit depressing at times, isn't it? Ultimately, Kidderminster, Wyre Forest doesn't deserve the grace of God. But neither do you and I. But we receive. This town, this district doesn't know how to call on the name of God. It perhaps doesn't know how to call on the name of God because it's enslaved, it's entrapped in so many things that the enemy uses to prevent people from coming to Jesus. It doesn't know how to call on the name of the Lord. They can't get free. And so God is calling us to stand in the gap on their behalf. Ezekiel 30 says, I looked for someone among them who would build up the wall and stand before me in the gap on behalf of the land, so I would not destroy it, but I have found no one. Israel's facing judgment for the way it turned away from God. And even after all they'd done, God is saying here to the prophet, I am willing to turn away my anger if there is just someone who would stand in the gap on behalf of the land for this people. Someone who would appeal to and advocate for, plead for a nation. God would have spared them, but he couldn't find any. He did the same with Moses in Exodus 32, the golden calf incident. God wanted to destroy the people because they turned away from him. They'd offended a holy God by their worship of other gods, but Moses stands between the people and God changes his mind. He turns away his wrath. Daniel confessed the sin of a nation before asking God to restore it. Nehemiah confessed the sin of Judah before asking God if he would raise up the walls. Do you see some of these biblical principles that we must take up and take on? If anyone is in doubt that prayer can be powerful, just read your Bibles. 2 Chronicles we mentioned before, if my people who are called by my name will humble. I said before, being humble is saying, I can't do it, Lord, but you can. And Lord, save us from ever feeling that we can solve the problems in our communities by our own strength, by our own ingenuity or ideas. It is only God that can. If my people are called by my name will humble themselves and pray. Prayer is the most neglected meeting in this church. The prayer meeting is the most neglected meeting in this church. People are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek his face. This is about personal encounter. The face reveals, displays. I can see what your faces are revealing to me now. Faces reveal and display the emotions and the feelings. What's going on? So we want to seek his face. We want to hear what his plans are. And God asks us to turn from our wicked ways. Then he will hear from heaven and heal our land. What a great thing it is that we can stand before God and intercede and intervene and plead before the Father, like the Son stands before the Father and pleads for us. I'm not great at understanding revivals or knowing too much about revivals, but I often read that the forerunner of any revival is prayer. Prayer puts everything that we are trying to do in the context of what God is already doing. Great stories of revival do not begin with once upon a time. They begin with a few of us gathered together to pray. Evan Roberts, we got someone from the Welsh Valleys, I think, today. And just mentioning Evan Roberts, he had a burning passion for Jesus, and he prayed for revival for 13 years before the Welsh revivals began. There's something encouraging, powerful, unifying when we come together as a church to pray. And so please do try and make every effort to come and pray together, but not to neglect the prayer that you do at home or other small groups, all those places. If we only relied on the prayer meeting as a place of prayer, then we'd already be lost. I believe that the transformation of our town only begins with the transformation of the church, to be carriers of his glory and to be releasers of his life into our communities. I want to close by reading Isaiah 61. You'll know it, the year of the Lord's favour. Jesus quoted from it. Half wondered about there's something here for our church text for next year, and do pray about that. But it strikes me as this is perhaps something of our heart for our communities, for our neighbours, for our friends, for our family. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant to those who mourn in Zion, to give them a beautiful headdress instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the garment of praise instead of a faint spirit, that they may be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that they may be glorified. They shall build up the ancient ruins. They shall raise up the former devastations. They shall repair the ruined cities, the devastations of many generations. Strangers shall stand and tend your flocks. Foreigners shall be your plowmen and vine dressers, but you shall be called the priest of the Lord. They shall speak of you as the ministers of our God. You shall eat the wealth of the nations, and in their glory you shall boast. Instead of your shame, there shall be a double portion. Instead of dishonor, they shall rejoice in their lot. Therefore, in their land, they shall possess a double portion. They shall have everlasting joy. As the people of God, we've got a responsibility to cry out for his presence to fill our communities. God is longing to be invited into our communities so that he can bring his love, his healing, his life and restoration to the people without hope. To exist without the revelation of the love of God is to be in a really barren and desolate place. I hope you know that. I hope you believe that. I hope you perhaps can remember the time when you were without God and hope in this world. This morning, as we reflect on building prayer as a key part of our seeking to be rebuilding the broken places and the broken people in our communities, we add it to what we talked about last time. Just having that right posture, that right heart, that right attitude. Perhaps our prayer should be, Lord, give me a heart of compassion for the broken places and the broken people in our communities without a critical or judgmental spirit. Lord, maybe our prayer should be, Lord, heal our laryngitis when it comes to speaking up for matters of justice and mercy. Break my heart for what breaks yours, for the lost, the lonely, the downtrodden. Help us to love you. Help us to love them like you love me. Help us to do what love requires of us. Help us to humble ourselves, to rise up and build prayer.